Alicia. Hi, Michael. All right, so we're gonna start. This event is recorded. I'm Montse Feo. I'm associate professor at World Languages at some Houston State University. Today I'm here with my husband, Dr. Aaron Gillette. He teaches history in the University of Downtown.
University of Houston Downtown.
University of Houston Downtown, sorry. And it's my very pleasure to welcome authors Weiden and Hopson today to talk about the recent novels. We thank them very much for accepting our invitation. We are very honored, especially because today is the publication date of Hobson's latest novel, and we are the first to celebrate it with him. So we're very happy to do that. And just to let you know that people who are here in the event today with us and will be commenting on the Facebook page, let me share it with you, which I don't think I did, will be in a raffle for 2 books. So remember that. And let me go back. Wait, I lost you. Okay, so first of all, this event is possible thanks to the College of Humanities and Social Sciences Committee on Diversity and Inclusion. And I would like to thank their members and chairs, and in particular, Brittany Johnson at the Dean's Office and our Dean, Lee, for always giving us our support to do the experience of our students diverse and exciting. And I want to introduce Dr. April Shermack. She's the co-chair, and she will let us know a little bit more of the committee.
Thank you, Montse. As she said, I'm Dr. April Shemek, and I am an associate professor in the English department, and I'm co-chair of the CHSS Diversity and Inclusion Committee. And we have several events in addition to this one, which I'm really looking forward to, but we have several other events, so look for announcements for those this semester. And we have events for Black History Month, Women's History, Arab and Muslim culture, and I believe other Latinx events, and other events I'm sure I'm forgetting. So look for announcements for that. Thanks.
We have the Facebook page here on our screen if you want to follow it. And we also post our events recorded so you can see past events too. So before we start, let me share how we're gonna plan the event. First of all, we'll ask you to keep your mics muted so that we don't have background noise. If you have any comments, questions, please write them on the chat, and we'll be looking at them and respond to them at the last minutes of the event. First, we're going to introduce the authors and their work with very general questions with our students. And after that, both authors will spend a few minutes reading from their latest novel. So I always like to share the bios online because I know some people like to read along with me. So let me read both bios. Let me know if you can see them. They are from the Facebook page. Everybody can see them. Yes, okay. So Brandon Hopson is the author of the novel The Removed. His novel, Where the Dead Sit Talking, was a finalist for the National Book Award, winner of the Reading the West Award, and longlisted for the International Dublin Literary Award. His fiction has won a Pushcart Prize and has appeared in such journals as McQueensney, Conjunctions, Noon, American Short Fiction, and many other places. Hopson is an assistant professor of creative writing at New Mexico State University, and also teaches Indian arts in, and also teaches in the low-res MFA program at the Institute of American Indian Arts in Santa Fe. He is an enrolled citizen of the Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma. Here you have seen a link to his page, so please follow the work. And also at the end of the event, they will tell us more about the upcoming events. David Heska Wanbli Weiden, an enrolled citizen of the Chicago Lakota Nation, is author of the novel Winter Counts, nominated for the 2021 Edward Award for Best First Novel. Winter Counts, an IndieBound and Amazon bestseller, is a New York Times Book Review Editor's Choice and was named one of the best books for 2020 by NPR, Publishers Weekly, Library Journal, Amazon, Sun Sentinel, Lit Reactor, Crime Reads, Deadly Pleasures, Airmail, Mystery People, and Bolo Books. The book was also selected as an Amazon Best Mystery and Thriller of the Year, an Indie Next Peak Best Noir Fiction and Best Debut of the Year, as well as notable selection for Best Crime Novel by Crime Reads. The novel was a main selection of the Book of the Month Club, Best of the Month by Apple Books, and was the November choice of the BuzzFeed Book Club and the AWP Virtual Book Club. And here you have also the link to David Weiden webpage. So I'm going to start with the questions that our students in our class were thinking about, and then I'll invite them to continue with a couple of more questions that we have talked about. So the first questions we wanted you to let us know, both of you, is why would you decide to write this latest novel of yours? Why did you decide to write this book?
Well, I'll go first. First of all, I just want to say thank you to Sam Houston State University and the committee and Montse and my friend Aaron, who's back there. It's a real pleasure to be here, and I'm so honored. And I have Texas roots. I did my PhD at the University of Texas at Austin, and so it's a pleasure to be there virtually. And I just want to say congratulations to my friend Brandon. As Montse so kindly stated, today is the launch day for Brandon's book, which a lot of people are really, really, really excited about. His book was also made a main selection of the Book of the Month Club last month, and it's getting reviews. I think it was reviewed in USA Today yesterday, isn't that right? And some other amazing places. And I had the good fortune to read Brandon's book early, and I can tell you that it deserves every bit of acclaim that it's getting. And so you're going to be seeing and hearing a lot about this book. So I'm just so thrilled to be with my friend Brandon here today. So I'll keep this short because I really want to hear what he has to say. I wrote Winter Counts to illustrate some issues that exist on Native reservations, specifically the broken criminal justice system on reservations. I'm an attorney, but I did not know a lot of this until I started studying these issues in depth. And the criminal justice system on Native reservations is broken. Native nations cannot prosecute felony crimes that occur on their own lands. Instead, they must hand off prosecution of these crimes to the federal authorities. However, so somebody rapes a child or somebody hurts a woman, somebody murders someone, then what happens is Native authorities must contact the FBI and the US attorneys and hand the case over. But the feds are declining to prosecute about 40% of all cases. This means that child molesters, rapists, murderers, arsonists are being set free. And this is absolutely an outrage, and it's contributing to obviously a difficult quality of life on many Native reservations. So that was sort of the primary issue and why I wrote the book. So anyway, I'll end there, and thank you again.
Thanks, David, so much for mentioning the book, and I'm really honored to be. Thanks to Sam Houston State and Montse. Thank you so much for inviting me to read and to talk today, and it's an honor to be here and to read alongside Dave. Dave's book Winter Counts is really fantastic. It's not only well written, but it's addresses issues I think that are very, very important. And so for the removed, for my new book, the way it began, I begin with questions, and Chekhov is a writer who said, you know, fiction should always explore questions. And I always do that when I begin working on something. And one of the questions that I explored when I was beginning the removed is what is it like to heal from trauma, and what is justice? Those are very big questions, right? But I have been reading a lot about police violence and police brutality, specifically against Native Americans and against Native teenagers, which was not getting the kind of news. And granted, this is back in around 2018 when I started really thinking about this. This was not getting a lot of national news coverage, the police brutality against Native teens. And generally the blame was on the teenager having some sort of mental illness. Anytime that a teenager or a Native in general was getting either shot by a police officer or treated with violence, it was generally that the Native had some sort of mental illness, and that bothered me, that the news was sort of blaming mental illness, and rather than the racism around the police brutality. And so that was one of the questions is not why does that happen, but how does a family recover from that? And so my novel explores a family 15 years after the shooting of a teenager and how they're able to, in different ways, cope with the trauma of losing a family member through violence, and then also that tying into the historical period of the Trail of Tears, which is when tribes were removed by Andrew Jackson and forced to leave their land. They relocated in Oklahoma, which is where I'm from, and my ancestors. And so there's an ancestor spirit who is also talking about that historical moment of suffering. So all that, was the beginning of why I wanted to write The Removed.
Thank you so much. So my students in the U.S. Latino literature class have been studying about the gold rush, the annexation, also on present crime novels, and they have also questions for you in general about the book. So I'm calling my students if they want to ask any of the questions we mentioned. I know they're very excited. You know, it's okay. I get nervous. My voice always trembles, but I do it. So here I am. So you can do it too. If I can do it, you can do it.
I have a question for Mr. Brandon Hopson. If you have encountered somebody, maybe personally within your family or your friend group, that has Native American background who is faced with violence, maybe like a personal experience that you've gotten to walk through, someone that you know kind of close.
Thanks for that question. Not anybody in my family that has suffered any kind of police violence, or there's certainly been in a state like Oklahoma, there's certainly been racism toward Natives. Now, I grew up in a town very close to Cheyenne, an Arapaho reservation, And so many of my friends, I had more Cheyenne and Arapaho friends than I did probably Cherokee Nation friends, just because of where we lived as a child. And I saw a lot of I saw a lot of racism toward natives and growing up, but generally those were my friends, and so nobody really faced any kind of physical violence in my family. But it exists. So much of it is out there, and it's not really getting the attention I think that it should. That's a great question. Thank you.
And I can jump in a little bit about that. So, the issue of violence against natives and people of color and marginalized peoples is one, that really haunts us. If I see, a lot of students here that nodding their heads. And when I say that, it's one of the things, that we have to struggle with. My grandmother was taken to a native boarding school called the Carlisle Indian School. If you're not aware, 40% of all native kids were taken by force away from their families and hauled across the country to these boarding schools where they were not allowed to practice their spirituality, speak their language. They were often physically and sexually abused, often murdered. These are the things that haunt us. And I, on a personal level, have felt the issue of violence, although I haven't been attacked myself. My first cousin, Aaron knows this story, Dr. Gillette. My first cousin murdered his mother, that would be my auntie, and his brother, that would be my cousin. And then he stole a car and started driving from the Rosebud Reservation to kill me. Now I was only 2 years old. And so I'm having a tough time figuring out, even now, why he would do this. Thankfully, he was arrested in Oklahoma with a stolen car and put in jail for 13 years before being released. And, these are the sorts of things that happen that have haunted me, this specter of violence. I've written an essay about my cousin and his murderous past and my attempts to forgive him for what he did. But that piece has not seen the light of day. But I'll just wrap up by kind of jumping on what Brandon said, that this issue of violence is just something that it's like a specter, I think, that follows us around. So I'll stop there.
Thank you for that. And it's important you mentioned about the schools, because last week, she's in the audience, Dr. Castañeda was telling us about her latest book that covers the history of Mary Potts. And I invite you to see it in our Facebook. It's a wonderful presentation about the life of this activist that was also moved forcefully and did the best of she could with all that knowledge. So it was a very interesting talk. So before we move into the reading part, let me tell you one of the other questions our students wanted to know. And is that they wanted to know, what is the most interesting discovery you did while you were doing the research and the writing of your book?
Okay, I'll go.
Go ahead, Dave. Yeah.
I'll go. There were so many things that were of interest to me in the writing of Winter Counts. So my book does take place on the reservation, and I suppose the biggest thing that surprised me was discovering how messed up the juvenile justice system is on Native reservations. So I'll be honest, I didn't actually know this until I started writing the book. But if you are a minor on Native reservations and you commit a felony crime or accused of committing a felony crime, you can be in a world of trouble, because there's not really an extensive juvenile justice system in the federal courts. So when a Native person commits a felony crime, as I mentioned before, that crime is prosecuted in the federal court system, not the state court system. And the federal court system is not well equipped to take care of juveniles. And often these young kids get thrown in to not always, but they get thrown into a full-time adult prison, which, obviously would have disastrous consequences. So the juvenile justice system for Native Americans is a true mess. And I wanted to do more in the book on that, but my editor was already said, this is too long, you need to cut it back. So I only touched on it, but I would say that was a big surprise for me.
Yeah, I can speak. I was actually a social worker for 7 years before I did my, I went back and got my PhD. And I worked with youth, so I can certainly say, particularly among Native teenagers, which is a lot of my work involves Native teenagers. There's a lot of issues out there. The research for this book that I did was based on my social work, a lot of it, because there's a foster kid who was taken in temporary foster placement. And I also spoke to a woman, a friend of my mom's, who had lost her child as a teenager because Maria, the mother in this book, has lost her son to gun violence. And again, 15 years later, what is it like? I don't know what that's like. I don't know what it's like to lose a child, and I certainly hope that I never do. But I needed to get inside Maria's head and really understand grieving, or try in as much as I can. That's part of, as fiction writers, what we do. We really try to understand what's going on, and so I spoke at length with this woman who had been, it's been 30 years at least since she lost her teenage son. And what's the grieving still like? Does she still grieve at all? Of course she does, right? And what was it like at the beginning? What was it? How did it continue to heal from the trauma? How was she able to heal from the trauma? Just all sorts of questions. She was able to just provide me with a lot of information. Those were difficult conversations, obviously, to have, but that was sort of my duty as a fiction writer. So those were the big. I also went back and looked at the old traditional Cherokee stories, because there are some, if you want to call them myths, but we call them, the old traditional stories that are being retold in the book. And so I wanted to go back and reread those and have them exist in a place of contemporary fiction, so that they're present now as well as in the past.
Thank you so much. So now we are for the part where we can be treated by hearing you reading about your novels. So you can maybe, I don't know if you want to start reading right away or having a conversation between you guys. You basically have now 30 minutes for you to take the lead, and then we'll have the last 10 minutes for questions from the audience.
I can read a little bit first, and then if something comes up, we'll see where we are with the time. And thank you so much for the opportunity to read a little bit. I'll give just a little bit of a setup here. This is from Winter Counts, and the setup for this, if you haven't figured it out by now, the hero of my novel is a gentleman, Virgil Wounded Horse, who is a hired vigilante. So if the federal authorities do not prosecute a crime and somebody's hurt a person, that person's family might call up a hired vigilante like Virgil, who will beat the tar out of someone for a price. His price is $100 for each bone he breaks and $100 for each tooth he knocks out. Now, I get asked this question a lot. These people actually exist on reservations. sort of the private market, if you will, has sprung up has acted to responded, if you will, to deal with a problem of justice on reservations. I know for a fact these people exist, and I should note that I'm not the first one to write about private vigilantes. If you're aware of the Longmire series by Craig Johnson, in the TV series, there's a vigilante called Hector, and so he's another one. So this is written from the voice. What I'm going to read here is the voice of Virgil Wounded Horse, and his nephew Nathan, whom he acts as a guardian to, has been unfortunately he's overdosed on heroin. And so Virgil is waiting in the hospital room to find out if his nephew Nathan is going to live or not. And so he's engaging in a little internal reflection here. So I'm just going to read a page or so of that. So this is from Winter Counts. Hours passed while I waited for Nathan to wake up. I tried to stop my mind from going to dark places, but images of my nephew as brain damage crowded into my head. I was proud of him, his intelligence and his curiosity, and his fierce defense of music I hated. It was breaking my heart and my spirit to imagine that these parts of him might be gone for good. And then I started to obsess over things Nathan had done that might have tipped me off to hard drug use. Had he been acting strangely? Maybe I should have searched his backpack and phone. I gave up trying to stop this parade of images and just sat with my fear and my guilt. The window outside my hospital room was murky, like it hadn't been washed in years, but I could still glimpse the russet hills and rolling prairie of the reservation outside in the dying light. Back in the time before Columbus, there were only Indians here, no skyscrapers, no automobiles, no streets. Of course, we didn't use the words Indian or Native American then. We were just people. We didn't know that we were supposedly drunks or lazy or savages. I wondered what it was like to live without that weight on your shoulders, the weight of the murdered ancestors, the stolen land, the abused children, the burden every Native person carries. We were told in movies and books that Indians had a sacred relationship with the land, that we worshiped and nurtured it. But staring at Nathan, I didn't feel any mystical bond with the res. I hated our shitty unpaved roads and our falling down houses and the snarling packs of dogs that roamed freely in the streets and alleys. But most of all, I hated that kids like Nathan, good kids, decent kids, got involved with drugs and crime and gangs because there was nothing for them to do here. No after-school jobs, no clubs, no tennis lessons. Every month in the Lakota Times newspaper, there was an obituary for another teen suicide, another family in the Burn Thigh Nation who'd had their heart taken away from them. In the old days, the Ayapaha was the town crier, the person who would meet incoming warriors after a battle, ask them what happened so they wouldn't have to speak of their own glories, and then tell people the news. Now, the Ayapaha, our local newspaper, announced losses and harms too often, victories and triumphs too rarely. Why didn't I leave? People here always talked about going to Rapid City or Sioux Falls or Denver, getting a job and making a clean break, putting aside native ways and assimilating, adapting to suburban life. But I thought about the sound of the drummers at a powwow, the smell of wild sage, the way little native kids looked dressed up in their first regalia, the flash of the sun coming up over the hills. I wondered if I could ever really leave the reservation because the res was in my mind, a virtual res, one that I was seemingly stuck with. And then I fell into a half sleep, immersed in fugue dreams and transient thoughts, images of Indian children dancing in my head.
Thank you so much.
Should I go ahead, Dave, and read a section, or?
Please do.
Okay. Thanks for that, Dave. That's a great, that's a fantastic scene from that. I had the pleasure of reading Dave's book early, which was a real joy. And man, it is so intense throughout the whole book, and so propulsive and moving. I'm going to read just a short section here, because I know that long readings can become very sort of boring, and so the conversations often feel more worthwhile in these kinds of things. And so I will read a very short section from a spirit ancestor named Chala. And Chala is telling his son they have both died for refusing to leave the land. Chala is based on a real man named Chali, spelled Tsali, who actually died when U.S. soldiers came to remove the tribes. He fought the soldiers and lost his life. And so in this book, he and his son both fought and died for refusing to leave. And so he's relating his story that sort of parallels with Maria and the family after losing their son to gun violence. Okay, so this is Chala. My beloved son, time among the dead is mysterious. Time among the dead does not exist the way humans experience it during life. Time may be felt. Look to the sky, and there we are, soaring like hawks, circling in the air. We are the birds appearing like a string of red berries against the clouds. We are all around, the deities to cover every expansive body of land. We are bathed in rainwater, flying together. We are a sparkle of blue light inside rocks, the swift rising of smoke and dust, forming the hazy outlines of bodies. We are speakers of the dead, the drifters and messengers, the old and the young, lurking in the shadows of tall trees at night, passing through the walls of abandoned buildings and houses, concrete structures, stone walls, and bridges. We are the ones watching from underwater, rising up like mist, spreading like a rainstorm, over fields and gardens and courtyards, flying over towers and rooftops and through the arched doorways of old buildings with spider cracks in their walls. We reveal ourselves to those who will look. It has been said we are illusions, nightmares, and dreams, the disturbing and tense apparitions of the mind. We are always restless, carrying the dreams of children and the elderly, the tired and sick, the poor, the wounded, the removed. In 1838, the firing squad killed you before they killed me. Your mother adorned us in gold and jewelry and buried us. You must know that adornment is as important in death as in life, so they made it known that we were beautiful, even absent of our spirits. An elder had once taught me not to be afraid of death, because there is no death. There is only a change of worlds. I refused to migrate west on the trail, and that is why we died. I refused because it was not fair treatment, and I was willing to sacrifice my life for you, our family, and our people. Yes, I know an old man has a mouthful of thunder. So does an old spirit. Before you were born, I helped Dragging Canoe and his son take the fleshy side of enemy scalps and paint them red and tie them to poles for the scalp dances. We imitated the Europeans who invaded us by dancing a foolish, awkward stomp to show their clumsiness. More importantly, the dance healed us by weakening the other races who were responsible for harm or sickness. It was also used to heal the sick for our own people. At one of the dances, I met a man whose war medicine was an Uktina's shedded skin and burned turtle shell which he used to smear on his face and body for protection from enemies. He had never been wounded because of wearing the swore medicine, as strong as yellow root. He warned me of the seventh hell we were living in, and soon I had dreams of the blood and destruction. Dragging Canoe told me, "You will be a visionary with prophetic gifts. You must learn to understand this." And I'll stop there, very short, but just to sort of give an introduction to the spirit Chala, as he speaks from the spirit world.
Thank you so much. We have already some questions from our students. So Mercedes, would you like to voice your question that you put in the chat?
Sure. My question is for Mr. Hobson. I wanted to ask how the cultural ties to the supernatural world and how the history and the ancestors help the family to navigate through the grieving process.
Thank you. That's a very good question. I think what I wanted to do is really show that connection with the supernatural, if you want to choose that word, the spiritual with the natural world, and show the connection through the land, through the earth, and how that grieving hasn't changed in 200 years, right? The suffering that Chala and the tribes went through, from Andrew Jackson sending soldiers to forcibly remove people where thousands died, and it's one of the worst events in U.S. history, is still felt very much among this family, in that here we have the authority, being the police, shooting a Native teenager, and that grief is still very present today. So the authority or the law, the government treating the Natives in this way is still felt as deeply, as wounded, and in many ways still feeling very removed from everything, which is one of the reasons why I titled this book, is not only the physically being removed from the home, but also on much deeper levels, feeling removed, from almost from humanity in a sense. Does that, Mercedes, does that answer the question?
Yes, thank you so much.
Okay, sure, yeah.
And I'd love to jump in a little bit
Yes.
on that wonderful answer from Brandon and that really great question. So Native spirituality, I know you're not completely asking about that, Mercedes, but Native spirituality is deeply important to us, and it does play a role in my book as well. And I just wanted to drop a little piece of information that this class may or may not know. So by way of background, in my day job, I'm a full professor of Native American studies. So I don't teach English or creative writing. My students don't even know that I write novels. They just see me as like that dorky, sad dude walking around the campus, and so they don't really have any idea. But that I write books. But in my Native American Studies class, my students are always stunned to learn that Native religion, Native spirituality was criminalized and outlawed until 1978. Okay, so I just want to let that sink in a little bit, because this is not really taught in the history books or the classes, but the practice of Native spiritual traditions was made a felony crime in the United States until 1978. And so a lot of our spirituality and traditions, we had to take it underground, so to speak. And my students are always just surprised by this. And they say, well, Dr. Weiden, what about the First Amendment of the Constitution? Doesn't that give us freedom of religion? And I have to tell them, I have to say, well, the Constitution is unfortunately not always fairly applied. And it certainly has not been applied fairly to people of color and certainly not natives. And so it is just a difficult fact of American history that it wasn't until the late 20th century that natives regained the right to practice our spirituality. So I just wanted to kind of toss that in there if you weren't aware of that. It's I think, an important fact. Anyway, I will shut up here.
Mercedes has a following question, actually.
Yes, my question is really for both authors, but I really wanted to ask Dr. Heska if you think there is a lack of coverage by the US media about all of the crimes and injustices suffered by the Native Americans.
I'll start with this since it's directed to me, but Brandon, I know you've got probably some great things to say about this. I do think that there is a lack of coverage. I would call it a lack of visibility of natives in general. So when you think about natives in the media, okay, what do you think of? You probably think of the movie Dances with Wolves, okay, which, you know, a movie was what, 20, 30 years ago, something like that. But when we're in the media at all, it's usually like something in the 1800s, some historical drama. Yes, there are a few exceptions. The Longmire series, there's a great new series on CW called Trickster that I've just started watching. So there are, you know, Canada seems to, that it's a Canadian show. They seem to do a better job at this. But I mean, you don't see us in commercials, right? You don't see like native folks just like, you know, walking and buying a car or a washer and a dryer or something. You know, we're kind of like the invisible group. So I would say not only is there a lack of coverage in the US media of the crimes and injustices, but there's a general lack of visibility. I'll give an example. I'm in Denver, Colorado right now, and the police shot and murdered a Native man just last summer. And it was a horrible, horrible thing. He wasn't doing anything, and they shot and they killed him. You know, this is, again, a lot what Brandon is writing about in his book, you know, and it made the Denver media, but it didn't make the national media at all. And this is not to take away from the other injustices that we witnessed, you know, last summer. But for some reason, I don't know what it is, but native crimes against natives or police brutality against natives, it never seems to take center stage. Anyway, I will stop there and let Brandon weigh in if he wants.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly right. I mean, just to add to that, even a news media like even CNN, you know, had listed us. Some often will not include natives, right? When they go through statistics, you know, we're often left out. I hope that that's beginning to change. And Hollywood really has not portrayed natives well at all. It's disgusting the way that Hollywood has portrayed, very savage, you know, the very sort of like, you know, very, very savage and very wild, you know, if I can use that term. But not that there are natives out who are attorneys, you know, and I mean that, you know, we're not, again, I hope that this is starting to turn. I feel like, you know, things, especially not to take away from all people of color. You know, and we saw last year, you know, such terrible gun violence. But specifically, natives are not getting that national. You can find the news stories if you Google it, right? And the Native Lives Matter movement, I think, came out of you know, the shootings against natives. But my hope is that you know, things that we will. And I think natives are generally at the very bottom of the scale in terms of getting any kind of acknowledgement. I'm just sort of echoing what David's saying here.
Thank you so much. Our
I
students.
have a
Oh, sorry. Our students have.
sorry, I have a quick question for them.
Oh, sure, Emiliano, you go first.
Okay. why do y'all think they don't cover all this stuff that happens to natives in the news, like on the national news? Why do they have them, like, for example, when David said that that he only made it on the state news, not the national news? What do y'all think they're not putting them on the national news?
I don't know. I'm as confused about it. You know, I always think that, you know, that's just easier. We always fear, let me say this, there's always a fear of erasure, right? You know, that tribes are continuing to, people want them to be erased, right? And that's always a fear in the back of my mind, right? And so not mentioned means they don't exist. I don't know, David, you can maybe speak a little bit. I don't know what the reason is. I sure hope that it changes, though.
Yeah, I mean, I think none of us have a great answer as to why natives seem to be so invisible. I mean, I suppose part of it is there are just fewer of us. You know, supposedly 1.7% of the census self-identify as native. So we're, you know, probably the smallest group. Every once in a while, there will be some sort of a media event that captures the imagination. I'm thinking of the Standing Rock, you know, that pipeline. You know, what was that called? The XL, whatever. You know, that really captured the country's imagination. But my nation, we also protested against a similar pipeline, and nobody gave two craps about us. So much so that the president of my nation issued a call to all male citizens of the tribe. He said, you need to come back to the Rosebud Reservation, and we're going to take up arms against the federal government if they try to build on our reservation. And I would have gone, but my thought was, if you're relying upon a middle-aged college professor who's shot a gun twice in his life, I think we're in trouble here, you know, because I'd be the first one down. I'd be the first one shot, you know, I'm the first to admit it. So, you know, so our you know, every once in a while there'll be an event that takes a lot of space in the imagination, but they seem to be fairly few and far between. So I'll stop there because I see other questions coming up in the chat.
Yes, before we go to those questions, I really like to follow up on that because it's basically what Emiliano asked was around what we were discussing in class. We are trying to see the experiences of early Latinos and today's Latinos on crime, because a lot of our students will be in law enforcement or in health population jobs. So they need to know. And one thing that we try to do is to draw connections with other populations that have suffered similar discriminations, so they can see what is similar and what is not. And obviously, if this happened also in media outlets like the press or the news, on those CEOs positions were also diverse and they had taken diverse courses, they would maybe think that their audiences also want to see diverse products. So I think it's not only what our students are we doing here, but also the people that go into mass communications really make sure that the public has access to this diversity that sometimes we don't, because those people on the CEO's positions don't seem to think that we want to see it, and we have to support. So please buy books and buy shows that do that for us and follow authors so that we as consumers have that power. So now we have Dr. Scott that has a question on the chat, and I invite him if he wants to say it to us. You are muted, Scott.
Oh, I see. Okay. So thank you, David and Brandon, for joining us and sharing your work. But could you, either of you talk about the challenges Native writers of providing a broad, complex representation of Native characters and lives and experiences set against the reader and perhaps publisher expectations of what sorts of Native stories they'll read?
All right, I'll start. This is thank you, if I may call you Scott. Thank you, Scott, for that wonderful question. This is something that Brandon and I have talked about and thought about a lot. And I'll say this, we're lucky because there seems to be what has been called a fourth wave of Native American writers, a new Native American literary renaissance. And I mean, I don't know if I'm worthy of being included in that, but Brandon Hobson certainly is. And my friend Tommy Orange and Stephen Graham Jones and Kelly Jo Ford and Erica Worth, you know, there seems to be a new group of Native writers who are writing against the expectations. You know, we're writing stories that have not been told before. Tommy, my friend Tommy, writes about the urban experience in a unique way. You know, Brandon is telling stories that haven't been told. I'm writing, you know, a crime story where you've got natives that are bad guys, natives that are good guys. And so I think the publishing industry is changing because there have been expectations in the past that natives have to be seen this way, that the stereotypes, that we worship the earth and we're stoic and all these things. But we're trying, you know, Brandon and I and the others, I think, to show, like, I like the way you put that, a complex and realistic representation of natives. You know, we're just living our lives, and I think that needs to be depicted in a truthful, artistic way. So Brandon, I'll hand it off to you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, I mean, the other thing too is to just say, you know, it's really difficult to just say, to lump all Native Americans into one group because every tribe is different. So, you know, people will ask me, is it still okay to say Indian, or do I say Native, or what? You know, and I always say, well, the best thing is to refer to someone by their tribe, right? Lakota, Navajo, Cherokee Nation. You know, that's generally the best. But each tribe has their own sort of stories and their own traditions, and I think there are a ton out there that are being told, that need to be told, and they're all very distinct, right? And I think it's dangerous to sort of, you know, also lump into a stereotype that you know, people look a certain way, which is not true. You know, and I know in my book, there's a section where Edgar goes into the Darkening Land, which is a place that's mentioned in Cherokee mythology, or the old traditional Cherokee stories, the Darkening Land, a place where one goes after death until justice is served, right? And so I was able to sort of create this mythical universe, this land that he goes to. But one of the things that I wanted to do there was have people stereotype, right, him while he was there, and where he becomes a target of stereotype. And you know, and I think that's very dangerous. There's a lot of progress that needs to be made. And to speak to the fourth wave of Native writing, I think you know, that's an important moment right now, and David's certainly a big part of that. Having a debut novel. I've written some other small press stuff, even that's not doesn't address Native issues at all. I've had several stories, and you know, that just these last two books where I've just really kind of started, you know, addressing more as I've gotten older and realize how much more crucial they need to be told. But I certainly have stories out there, and I think Native writers can certainly write stories that don't have to involve Native issues necessarily, right? So there, you know, there is a long way to go, I think, and publishers, to go to Scott, to answer your question about publishers. You know, I think that from my own experience, you know, publishing, at least New York publishing, seems to have also sort of very limited knowledge as to, they need to realize there are a lot of Native writers out there. Not many of us are getting any kind of, you know, attention. I think that's starting to change, but certainly my students, I live in Las Cruces, New Mexico, and I have a large Latinx, population of students largely here. And but when I teach up in Santa Fe, I have a lot of Native students out there, and so I'm just sort of echoing. I know what David said, but it's certainly there. There's so much that I think that can be that certainly to publishing. Publishing likes to just focus on a small group, I think, and we're talking. There are many tribes out there with many stories. So.
Thank you so much. The next question, it comes from Rodrigo. Rodrigo, do you want to ask the question now?
Yeah, so first off, I'm sorry that I'm in black and white again, but I still haven't figured out a way to fix that. But anyways, so I wanted to talk a little bit, or I wanted to ask you guys a little bit about, you guys mentioned that a lot of stuff was left kind of on the cutting room floor. So per se, how much of that was left on the cutting room floor, and how much more of the Native American experience did you want to share in y'all's book?
I can start. Thank you, Rodrigo. And by the way, the black and white looks pretty cool. I actually would like to do that on my Zoom. I'd like to figure that out. So I kind of dig it. How much did I leave on the cutting room floor? The answer is a lot. Brandon and I are both on a press called Echo Books of HarperCollins publishers, but we work with different editors. And my editor told me that, Dave, you got to cut about 20% of this book. And it was absolutely brutal to do. And so I didn't know. So I did leave a lot out. I didn't cover as much on the healthcare system. So if you're not aware, Natives, we get our healthcare typically, if you live on a reservation, from something called the IHS, the Indian Health Service. And we get often the worst doctors that, maybe they've been disbarred, or I don't know what kicked out of the medical profession somewhere. We tend to get often the people that can't get jobs anywhere else. And I really wanted to explore that. And that just had to go. So there were a lot of the issues. Now, the happy news is that I signed a 2-book contract. And so I'm working on the next book in the series, which is called Wounded Horse. And I thank you. And so I owe that manuscript to HarperCollins sooner rather than later. So I'm trying to squeeze out time here and there. So I hope to return to some of those issues. Thank you for the great question.
We have is anything you want to add, Dr. Hopson? Is anything you want to add?
Not much really. I just want to, as far as what got cut out, in my book, a lot of including some of the old traditional stories through the spirit, I ended up cutting quite a bit of that out because it got very long, and there were some concerns as we're spending too much time in the old stories, and we should keep this more minimal, so it doesn't bog the reader down too much. So I cut some of that stuff. Yeah.
So we have the next question is from Christine. You are muted, Christine.
No, it's just not a question. It's just to tell them that their stories are wonderful. My grandfather was an English teacher for the Cherokee Indians, and he has told us so many stories. And this today was a very wonderful. I'm so sorry that you're not edified more in today's world, but. Well, you have such history behind, and you are the first people of this country. I'm so in my heart. I'm very proud of the Indians. Really, I am really proud of the Native Americans. Thank you so much for your stories and your books. Thank you.
Christine, did your grandfather teach
in English for the Cherokees Indian in Oklahoma.
Okay, so
In New Mexico. In New Mexico.
oh, okay, great, all right, yeah.
Very interesting. He had so many, many good stories. So many good stories. I miss him a lot for that. Yeah.
So he probably, did he teach in Cherokee Nation, Tahlequah?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
And I even went to the University of Tahlequah.
Oh, Northeastern State, okay.
Yeah, Northeast.
Yeah, okay, great.
Very, very interesting. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Christine. We have a question now from William Guillermo. You want to voice your question? Perfect.
Yeah, so this is more of a question for Dr. Weiden. Throughout the research and the process of writing your book, did you ever see the justice, like the criminal justice system within the reservations change, or were there certain attempts to make changes that you saw?
Thank you, William, for that question. So the book has only been out for 6 months, and so I have not seen a lot of changes. I am happy to tell you, though, that the book has sparked a dialogue. I published an essay in the New York Times back in July, a nonfiction essay where I talked about these issues, and I got, the New York Times has a circulation of 4 million people, and I got a massive response, including from some policymakers, the dean of the New Mexico Law School, and some other folks. And they have said, what you've done is you've taken this issue, which we've been writing about in a scholarly way, but you've made it, in the national discussion. You've popularized it, or you've made it, so that people know of it. You've increased awareness of it. And so I do believe that there are some discussions happening in Congress right now that will change some of these laws. So I don't want to bore everybody here, but there's something called the Major Crimes Act. It either needs to be amended or there needs to be additional funding given to law enforcement on Native reservations. And so I believe that there is an effort, now that we have a change in the national political administration, to possibly do some changes. And if I contributed to that in any small way, I'm so thrilled. As of yet, no, but fingers crossed.
This is very important, your answer, because we were just talking the other day in class how important fiction is to sometimes bring topics on the conversation that otherwise don't get discussed. And it's very important that you were saying that. Aaron had a question, right, Aaron?
Yeah, sure.
I keep him for last because we are over the time. I didn't want to cut anybody.
Dr. Weiden, I'm curious to know, of course, your book addresses organized crime, FBI procedures, and so on. How did you learn about how all of those work? How did you learn about realistic FBI procedures, for example? Did you talk to somebody from the FBI or do internet research, or are there books about their procedural operations that you read, or how did that work?
Yeah, thank you for that question. That stuff I knew almost nothing about, police procedure and FBI procedures and all this. And that was just straight internet research, so I researched how it all happened. And I also had to research gun stuff because if it's not clear by now, I am not a gun guy. And I needed to make sure that I didn't mess up, because I'm told that the gun people will get really mad if you misstate a gun thing in a book. And so I didn't know, I think a revolver doesn't have a safety. I didn't even really know what a revolver was, but I've learned, okay? And so, so anything having to do with guns and anything having to do with FBI or police procedures came from straight internet research. So thank you.
We are a few minutes over time, but this is wonderful. And we want to hear more about your upcoming events. You mentioned it, that you have so many events, because we want to hear about those and following your books. I would like to say before we leave that characters like Vigil, and we look forward to reading your book, Brandon, has helped a lot of students to make connections with the history of bandidos. And we were also reading about Lucha Corpi, how she was telling with her moms how to do a good poison to kill men that abuse women. So all these, all these crime stories that people in the community find ways to defend their people because the authorities are not doing their job. So they take on that role. And a lot of our students that are in the criminal justice department and are learning to be on that profession really are learning a lot on how all these intricacies and connections. So we're very, very happy to have you, and we enjoy it a lot, and we're looking forward. They have in their assignments to make their connections, and as a final project, they may take one of your books as a final project. So we are very, very excited. And again, we have a raffle. Follow us on Facebook, and please let us know about your coming events so we can close this event so everybody can, we said we're gonna finish around 12. So David or Branson, if you want to tell us about your coming up event, you can share your screen if you need to.
Go ahead, Brandon. I know you've got a bunch.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. I don't have it on the screen, but I have my
just say it. I don't.
Yeah, I just so tonight I have an event with Magic City Books in Tulsa, which begins at 7 p.m. Central, 6 p.m. Mountain. I did an interview. I'll be on NPR, All Things Considered today. Next Sunday, the 7th, Bookworks in Albuquerque. I think next Sunday's Super Bowl Sunday. So I expect, roughly 2 to 3 people to show up. I don't know if that will be all that exciting, but and then Elliott Books, Dave is going to join me again on Wednesday the 10th, 7 p.m. Central, 6 Mountain. Elliott Books in Seattle. Dave and I will continue, and hopefully that'll be a good turnout to talk about our books. And so that's basically over the next week or so. I am doing a pen event too on the 16th with Rebecca Mackay, who wrote a fantastic book called The Great Believers that was finalist for the National Book Award and the Pulitzer Prize. So I'm excited about doing that pen event. So
I've only got one that I'll mention. My book has been out for 6 months, so I'm feeling I'm kind of like the carton of milk that is expired, and it's like, should I drink this? It might be okay. Toss it out, So that's kind of how I'm feeling these days. But I do actually have one pretty cool event. The Virginia Festival of the Book is happening in March. It's all virtual, and there's a great panel that I'll be on with some of, I think the panel is called Rural Noir Crime. And I'll be on with the great, great novelist, Sean Cosby, who's a buddy of mine. His book, Blacktop Wasteland, is probably the crime novel of the year. Chris Harding Thornton, who's got a great new crime book out set in central Nebraska, and Heather Young. And so this is in March at the Virginia Book Festival. Events, you can go to my website, davidweiden.com, and or just Google. But that one should be a good one. So anyway, thank you again so much for everybody, the great questions and the wonderful thoughts.
yes, thank you everyone for the questions and for the opportunity to be able to talk. It's been a real honor.
Thank you everybody for coming. You'll see in the chat there is a lot of people thanking you, and so feel free to, I also posted the link to the Facebook, so you feel free to continue the conversation there if you need to. This video will be posted shortly. It's been an honor to have you with us. Students are more than thrilled. I know they've been emailing me, and colleagues too. and friends. So we are very excited that we were hosting this event, and we thank you, and thank you all for coming and your wonderful thoughts and questions and comments. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Bye-bye, everyone. Bye-bye. You want to learn too? Okay. Bye-bye. Yeah.